Okay, so we're here for the 5 stages of negotiation. So I think one of the first things we need to do is uncover what negotiate means. So to negotiate, to discuss something formally in order to make an agreement. So always remember the end goal is to make an agreement. And then the second definition that Merriam-Webster gives us is to agree on something by formally discussing it. And I think this is really important for us as realtors because what does formally indicate? Formally indicates that we're going to put this in writing. And I strongly encourage you, not only encourage you, in most states it's the law, to put our agreements in writing. And so we want to make sure that once we have gotten all the parties to agree, that we don't just send a text message or an email, that we actually memorialize the conversation in an addendum. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So also included in the definition of negotiate is to get over, through, or around something successfully. And I think this is one of the key things we need to keep in mind when it comes to negotiating. There is more than one way to get to the desired outcome, and to never lose sight that the desired outcome is actually your buyer getting the house they wanted or the seller selling the house that they wanted to sell to get on to the next thing they need to do. So I think it's just really important to discuss the definition first. Karen, did you have something you wanted to add?
No.
Okay, well, thanks for turning your camera on. I appreciate you. Thanks for that. All right, so here are the 5 stages. Again, anyone who would like to, feel free to lift your camera. I am not offended if you take as many pictures as you want of our slideshow. At this point, we don't share them. But here is the 5 stages of negotiation. The first is expectation. And this is the step we're going to spend some time talking about because this is the one agents often miss, and then it's the one that causes the most problems later. We're all aware of conflict. We have conflict every day. Just driving to work can cause a conflict in your life, right? So we're all aware of conflict. When conflict happens, the next step is what is essential, and that is understanding. So many times people listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And there's a huge difference because if I'm listening to respond, I'm only picking key words that support the argument I'm about to make. If I'm listening to understand, I have both ears open. I really am going to ask a lot of questions and fully understand the position before I start to make an argument for another position. And so then after we fully understand the situation, we're going to move into compromise. And compromise is not a dirty word. I love the book, Never Split the Difference. Aside from that, some of you are newer agents, so if you'd love to read a great negotiation book, it's called Never Split the Difference. The only thing I hate about that book is the title, because the title of that book kind of implies that you'll never compromise, never split the difference. And actually the opposite is true, and the techniques he teaches is the opposite of never compromising. It is saying never split the difference because so many times, especially agents, will jump right to, in order to make a compromise, you're here, I'm there, go in the middle, we'll have an agreement. And oftentimes we're negotiating something that a buyer or seller doesn't even care about because we didn't take the time to understand fully their position. And then after we've worked through and massaged a compromise, then we get to an agreement. And it's really, really important, as we said in the definition of negotiation, that we come to a formal agreement. And that means putting it in writing. So we're going to take a deep dive into each of these things. So negotiation, stage 1, expectations. When we're talking about a buyer, This is one of the reasons why the buyer consultation, even prior to having to have a BBA signed, we should have been doing formal consultations with the buyer. This prevents so many problems in the future. So what expectations is your buyer or seller bringing into this relationship? And we need to know how to lead them into adjusting their expectations so that they meet the market and the process. So if a buyer expects to move into the house before closing, which, believe it or not, in the 30 years I've been a realtor, there were actually a couple of buyers I worked with that they're like, can we look at vacant houses because we want to move in before the closing? They just don't even understand. No, you're not moving in anywhere until you get a mortgage and pay for the house, right? There's some time that we have to take to get to understand what their expectations are. The Buyer Power Pack is a tremendous help in helping to set expectations. If you haven't ordered yours yet, it'll help you serve probably 10 or 20 buyers. It has the simplified BBA in there that you can get signed at a first meeting so that you meet the requirements of NAR, but then you can go ahead and move into a formal agreement that you need for your state later. There is the 7 Homebuyer Strategies magazine, as well as the full Homebuyer Workbook, and it will script out your entire consultation. If you go ahead and read that book, you'll have a formal buyer consultation all in your head just from understanding that 24-page workbook. So here are what I feel are the major expectations where things come off the rails. So the first is disclosure. So sellers need to understand that they have to disclose any material defects in the house. They have to disclose lead paint. As agents, we have to disclose agency relationship in some states. In some states, it's assumed what our agency relationship is. But regardless, we should be explaining to them. Even if you're a transaction broker, you owe confidentiality with price, terms, and motivation. So as an agent, I hope you don't ever say their starting offer is, because if you ever say the words the starting offer is, you have actually violated your duties as a transaction broker. Then are we explaining the process? We really need to help the buyer understand the process. And the first is this new hurdle, the buyer brokerage agreement. Every agent has to get one signed. And if they've been working with an agent that hasn't had them sign it, this is your opportunity to say, well, I'm not sure how they're going to represent you as an agent if they aren't following the protocols necessary for professional realtors. And then pre-approval. We definitely want to know if they can afford a house or a Happy Meal. So let's go ahead and put them through the pre-approval process. And then if you're getting a listing agreement, are you helping them understand the process? We do not have to pre-negotiate the buyer compensation. If we choose to pre-negotiate it, then we may have to make an amendment to our listing agreement. If the buyer broker has an agreement with their buyer, you just really need to explain this new process of maybe not pre-negotiating, but understanding that the offers that come in from buyers will likely include compensation for their agent. So again, just taking the time to explain this in the beginning can really help. We need to help them understand market conditions. In 2021, we really didn't have to worry about overpricing a house because the market was going up so rapidly. Did you know that between 2020 and 2023, homes in Florida increased by 68% over a 3-year period? That's ridiculous. And it was impossible to overprice the listing because if you put it on this month, in 3 months, it went up by 10% anyway. So it was in the market and you still had your listing agreement. There was very little risk in overpricing in that crazy runaway train market. However, today, there is a risk of overpricing. Yes, our market has not collapsed. We have not seen really any give back in some states, a little bit in others, but overpricing now can become a risk because we are in a normalized market and actually are seeing marginal increases in pricing. And it could, in some areas, decrease. And that's when you're really harming your seller by letting them overprice? So are you really able to articulate the market conditions, especially around interest rate? That's the affordability issue that is front and center in our market right now. And then talking about, contributions, again, we've seen a lot of buyers needing extra help in order to get into the house, including mortgage buy downs. So we're going to have to talk about these things in advance. Otherwise, they become a huge issue if we wait until there's a conflict. Transaction management, again, talk about the timeline. When do we get a pre-approval for a buyer? For a seller, when are they going to make repairs? What happens in a home inspection? And that goes for both buyers and sellers. And the big one is appraisal. Appraisal can become an issue again, especially as the market may soften. So how are you going to talk to a seller about appraisal? Would any of you like a great appraisal pre-negotiation or an expectation setting script? I'm going to wait to hear from some of you.
I would love one.
Okay. So when we're going to talk to people about appraisal, especially if we're nervous when we've already talked to them and tried to get them to price the home correctly and they just want to shoot for the moon. So you say, I know I'm going to be a great marketer for your home. I know that no one here will represent you better than I can in the marketing of your home. However, we have to sell your home multiple times unless the buyer is paying cash. We have to sell it to the buyer. We have to sell it to the home inspector, and then we have to sell it again to the bank. And the bank sends an appraiser. So when the appraiser comes, he is going to look at the same comparable properties that I just showed you in order to establish the value of the house. And as you can see, we're extremely optimistic. So I want you to know there's a chance that the appraisal could come back lower than the sale price. But I want you to be assured that is a good thing, because that means we did not leave 1 penny of your equity on the table. That means we were able to squeeze out every penny from your house and got the highest price the market will allow. So I'm going to feel really good about that if it comes in just at or slightly under the appraisal, I'll know I really helped you get top dollar for your home. So the key phrase here is we didn't leave a penny of your equity on the table, because that's what people are afraid of when they think they can always negotiate down, but there is a risk in overpricing. So transaction management, we want to make sure that we followed all of those things. Communication, it's important in setting expectations. How do you communicate with people? And more importantly, how do they want to communicate with you? If you're working with someone who's a teacher, perhaps, or works in a doctor's office, they cannot get on the phone in the middle of the day. Like, this is just not possible for them. So it's really important to talk to them about, how would you like me to communicate with you? Do you prefer text? Do you prefer phone call? How often do you feel would be great communication? Because my goal is to have excellent communication with you. So what does that mean? And of course, with what tone? One of the things, obviously you're not going to discuss this with your customer, but it's important for you to have a tone of confidence and a tone that you really understand this process. It makes them feel insecure. So make sure you really do understand the real estate process. Shadow someone if you haven't had a transaction yet. Ask someone if you can just watch them or listen to them on the phone. One of the best things I did for my career was volunteer to be an assistant for one summer. My second year in real estate, I became an assistant for our top agent in the office just for the summer. Her assistant had little children and needed to have the summer off. And I said, I'll do it for you this summer. And it was the best thing I ever did. I just got to sit and be a fly on the wall with a top producing agent, listening to her talk to her customers. And then standards. What are your standards? Do you work 24/7? Do you take phone calls at 11 p.m. just because someone's nervous? Try to set a standard without being too dogmatic about what you do. And do you have a written marketing plan? And every person at LPT can say, yes, I do. Because, you don't have to invent anything here. It's all done for you. So you have an excellent marketing plan. Now the thing is to follow through. If you said you're going to look for more off-market properties for a buyer, are you going to do that? Be very careful that you're not promising things that you're not going to deliver. And then we have to talk about recovery. Like, you are going to make mistakes. Your buyer or seller is going to make mistakes. So what's your process? And again, you don't have to share this with anyone, but I want you to think about it. What is your process for when things get off schedule? And then referrals. Right away, talk to people about referrals, because we expect them after the closing. Why aren't we talking to them from the day we met, especially if these people were referred to you? You want to say, I am so excited to be working with you. Lisa referred you to us, and I am really so thrilled to be working with nice people, because I know she's a nice person and she's going to refer me nice people. I love working with referrals. As a matter of fact, I'm not one of those realtors that goes out there and cold calls, because I have such a great base of people that refer to me, because I'm really focused on making people happy. Like, talk about referrals right from the beginning. A lot of times people in the process of buying or selling a home are in contact with other people buying or selling. Don't wait until the closing to ask for referrals. You're going to earn them along the way. And of course, it's a good little pinch for us to remind us that we're always working not only for this sale, but the sales in the future, especially if it's a challenging price range or a challenging listing that we're trying to sell. So any questions about the expectations that we should set? I'm going to go quickly here and say, here's some of the little hiccups we get with sellers. Sellers get attached to certain things, and they kind of make trouble for us in the end. They're like, oh, I'll sell the house, but not my grandma's chandelier. That has to go with me. Or my Mac Daddy refrigerator that actually keeps the family schedule and all the other things that these new refrigerators do. Or, nope, my she shed, that's coming with me, because that's my place of peace from this crazy family I have, right? So sometimes a seller will pick something that has to be theirs. So what are some of the things we can do to accommodate them, but help them understand that this could be a problem later? Like, we need to tell them, hey, why don't we go ahead and pack up grandma's chandelier, because we don't want someone to get attached to it. Let's go ahead and replace the refrigerator now so that someone doesn't get attached to it. Like, one of the best things is to just get it out of the way before we ever take the listing. And then sometimes sellers are still living in 2021, and they're like, so, when we get these 12 offers, how are we going to deal with it? So we really, again, if we're setting the proper tone with what is going on with the market, we'll be able to accommodate that. And then one of the biggest things, as a reminder for everybody that's here, is that we need to take the time in the beginning. We're sometimes very anxious. We want to run out there, get out and show some houses if we're working with the buyer, or we just want to get that listing. So we're just focused on, here's your CMA and here's what the listing paperwork looks like. And we're not taking the time to set the expectations. And this is, if you find yourself in trouble in negotiations later, I think if you're honest with yourself, you didn't set the expectation in the beginning. And one of the places I got in trouble all the time in the beginning as a realtor was working with friends and family. I shortchanged their experience because hey mom, my cousin, I'm going to go out and show her houses. Then all of a sudden she listed her house for sale by owner. Like, I didn't explain to her, like, I help you with both of these things, right? So it's really important to go through the full process before we work with anyone, especially friends and family. We tend to take shortcuts, and we're really shortchanging ourselves, especially the referral part. If we don't let them see how really good we are at this, they're not going to refer us to other people, because they're working with us because we're their cousin. But they don't really feel comfortable referring us if we're not giving them the same stellar treatment. So always take the time to do that presentation. Any questions on expectations? Did we cover that full enough? Okay, then here we go. It happens. Conflict. Here we are. Whoop, whoop. We're in a conflict, and it can arise at any stage. Sometimes it's right in that first consultation. Have you spoken with a mortgage lender to confirm your purchasing power? No. We don't want to run our credit or whatever excuse they're going to have. We are now in conflict because I'm not putting you in my car. Of course, I know people don't go in people's cars so much anymore, but I'm not going to show you houses until we have a pre-approval. So we're going to have to work through the conflict, and we'll go through the 5 stages. I'm going to set the expectation that this is how I work. And one of the best ways to navigate when you get into conflict is to really do that lead in to our next phase, which is, could you help me understand your position? Asking people to help you understand is a lot different than saying, why? Why do you think you can get out and look at houses without a pre-approval? The word why has like a little arrow attached to it. So just be careful when you use it. It can be good if you're trying to be pointed to use the word why, but when you're not trying to be aggressive, I wouldn't use the word why. Just say, can you help me understand? So here we are, here's a conflict. We had a home inspection and a couple of things came up. And the seller says, well, there were 3 other offers, so why do I have to repair any of this stuff? You need to help them understand that, in fact, all of those offers were also from people who did not have a home inspection. And the fact that your circuit breaker box has a recalled item in it, that's something that everyone's going to discover, and it's a fire and safety hazard. So every buyer is going to uncover this during the inspection, and now that we know about it, you're going to have to put it on the disclosure. So why don't we try to work with this buyer? We can use the leverage that there are some other buyers still interested in the house, and maybe we'll get him to be reasonable about the replacement of the circuit breaker box. So does that help to understand like how we can help them navigate a conflict? Just, you don't go take the other side, but you also have to understand that their position is now changed as well. So here's what you do when you get in conflict. Say, I told you so. One of the really good things is to set up a common enemy and then only look for one solution and absolutely refuse to compromise. No, don't do any of that. And yet that is exactly what I've seen over the years most agents do. Maybe the seller said, I want to keep the chandelier there. And you went through your speech and you said, well, I would suggest that we take it down. We don't want someone to fall in love with it. No, we're just going to exclude it in the MLS. And sure enough, here comes an offer that wants their chandelier. Don't say, I told you so. Under your breath, maybe, like just like with your kids, maybe you say it under your breath, but you cannot point out to the seller, I told you this was going to happen. That does not solve anything. The other thing is we don't want to set up a common enemy. We don't want to say, now can't that agent read? That agent saw right there in the MLS, it said, we're not including the chandelier. So what's wrong with them? I'm already setting up this hostility for the other side, which is then going to come to bite me later, maybe even when the buyer is asking for something reasonable, because I've already set it up with the seller that they're unreasonable because they couldn't read the MLS. The other thing is, we're not going to only look for one solution. We're not going to say, well, that they can read the MLS. It says no chandelier. There's no chandelier going with the house. That's it. You can say to them, instead, now, here we are. The buyer does love the chandelier as much as you do. Is there any price that you would be willing to let go of the chandelier for? And I've had that happen. It's like, it's my grandmother's chandelier. Well, the buyer's willing to give you $5,000 for it. Okay, I can get a new grandma. It's like, they're like, yeah, oh, well, $5,000. I think things only worth a couple hundred. I'm good. So don't look for just one solution. And then never refuse to compromise. We always have to find a place where we can compromise with everyone, even if it's the smallest smallest give, if we can just give the tiniest bit, it will be so helpful. So one of the things we're going to say in a conflict, here's some rules. This is one, if you are taking notes, absolutely write these down. Keep your emotions out of it. Even if your mortgage is dependent on this sale happening, you have to keep that out of the transaction. Keep it contractual. Keep this according to what was agreed in the contract. Don't let their emotions cloud your emotion. Keep pointing them to what they agreed to in writing. And then trust that the other agent is doing their job. And this is getting back to this idea that can't they read, or this I see constantly. Do not vilify the other agent. The other agent is zealously representing their customer, and you're zealously representing yours. You can be an advocate without being adversarial with the other people. And then focus on the goal. Constantly remind people, this seller really does want to sell their house, and I really would like to work with you to make that happen. Or this buyer really does love the house. They're just nervous. The home inspector, brought out these things, and they are really material defects that we have to address. Keep focused on solutions. Any questions about conflict? We're all familiar with conflict, but did anyone get maybe some ideas on how they can better handle it? Stage 3 of negotiation is understanding. And like I said, when we're in conflict, using that expression, can you help me understand your position, is really important. So this is where we show our skill or our lack of it, because there's a fine line between being an advocate or just being transactional and pushy. So we just don't want to cross that line of just being transactional. So we don't have to give in to unreasonable requests, but we have to help them understand what are the things that they want. And this is really important with buyers. When you do a home inspection, they tend to want to give the whole laundry list, everything that the inspector discovered, and then they end up giving up the things they really wanted repaired. So I think it's always important to say to a buyer, if we give them a laundry list, they may do 5 and feel like they've done enough, and it's the 5 you don't care about. So can we prioritize this list from the home inspector and really kind of narrow it down to 5 things that are most important for us to ask the seller to do? And they may come up with 6 or 7, but at least it will get you down from the full report of 16 pages that they want you to send to the seller and say fix everything, because that's just not reasonable. So when we're in understanding, we're going to keep our emotions out of it. You're going to consistently see this throughout the presentation, because you getting emotional is not helping anyone. Then we want to review all the aspects of the offer, not just the pain point. This is especially important as we're heading into times when we're going to maybe get offers that aren't at full asking price. Don't just go, oh, here's the price. Don't do that. You always start, and I got this hint my very first orientation at the board in 1994, and I've used it all my career, and it's very helpful. And that is, when you're presenting an offer, even if you are the listing agent and you have this contract from the buyer's agent and you're going to present it to the seller, start at the back of the contract. The back of the contract usually has the additional contractual provisions. It might have anything special that they need. And then it'll start talking about the closing date. It'll talk about their financing. They may have a spot in there where they're talking about how much money they're putting down. They may have an additional deposit that they're willing to release. I mean, it depends on your state contract. But the point is, you just go backward, and the last thing you say is price. Because when you start with price, the seller will shut down their ears and not hear anything else. So if they're saying, let's say the house is vacant, for me, I'm personally selling my investment house. It's sitting there vacant. It's costing me money every month. I want it to go. So if an offer comes in, I don't want to just look at the offer. I want to say, oh, are they going to close in 30 days? That saves me a couple mortgage payments and a couple electric payments, right? So when we're presenting this, we want to say, And look, they're putting down the ideal closing date that you were asking for. That's going to get you to Minnesota right on time. Like, we want to talk about the benefits of all of the parts of the puzzle, not just the price. Because if we go right to price and it's not perfect, then they're never going to hear anything else. So look for those wins. Like I said, the perfect closing date, they're putting a substantial amount of money down. That means they're going to have a lot of skin in the game. How are we going to talk about the offer other than just, here's the price? Like, we don't want to do that. Remind them of their original motivation for selling. So we want to get back and say, remember when you said how you really wanted to be there for your granddaughter's christening? This is going to get you there right on time, right? So we want to definitely go back to their point of motivation. So who are you in the real estate transaction? Are you this? Or are you this? The choice is yours. We are the calm and knowledgeable guide. We need to always remember that. You just do your yoga in the morning and say, I am the calm and knowledgeable guide. That's who you are. We're not this. We're not in middle school anymore. We're not creating a common enemy. We're all working toward the same goal. Now, I want to have a little caution now about texting. See this guy, he's just texting them, I think we can make that work. But they heard, I think we could make that work. Like, text has emotion, and it has the emotion of the receiver. So make sure when you're in a situation where it's getting a little agitated, that we are always either making a phone call or asking even to meet them in person, especially if it's between you and the other agent and things have gotten a little heated. I'd say, you know what, can we meet for coffee? Let's try to hash this out together. Try to get in a face-to-face meeting. This is one of the things I miss the most about negotiating back in the 90s. We went to people's kitchen table as the opposing agent and presented our offer. And you got a lot more done with a lot less time and going back and forth because we just sat there until we figured it out. So don't set up them and us. We're all in this. Look for a win-win. It's, generally a win-win means this person loses a little and this person's losing a little, and it creates the win-win. So remember we talked about those previous expectations, and let's just say the appraisal comes in low. Now, we told them that script about we're happy when an appraisal comes in low because it means we didn't leave 1 penny of equity on the table. But now the appraisal did come in low, and it's lower than they even thought. So they're like, well, they're going to have to come up to the price. When an appraisal is low, there are options. The buyer can bring more money. The seller can lower the price a little bit. We can actually ask for a reappraisal, but just be really careful with that because generally they average the two together and it very rarely comes up to what we need. But it is a challenge, it's possible. So there's not only one solution. We can ask the buyer, like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to ask your uncle for some money or something. This is how much we're willing to compromise. Otherwise, we're willing to find another buyer, right? But appraisal issues are really hard to navigate because putting the house back on the market, especially if it's an FHA or a VA loan, that appraisal stays with the house. And so that appraisal is going to stick with it, and you're going to reduce the buyer pool because now you can't accept an FHA offer and you can't accept a VA offer because that appraisal still exists. So then we get to stage 4, compromise. Make sure you have a thorough understanding of exactly what everyone needs and why they need it, and then work toward a compromise. And don't focus on the immediate conflict. Keep reminding the buyer or seller, remember how long we looked at houses? You finally found one you like. Let's try to stay in this and work through this together. So when you get to compromise, look again, keep your emotions out of it. Remember, you're the calm and knowledgeable guide. You're here to help people make good decisions that work for them. Sometimes we've discovered in a home inspection, this house is falling apart. It's not good for the buyer anymore to buy this house. We have to accept it and move on. Don't get caught up in the fact, well, I really need this buyer to close on this house because I want to go on a vacation next month. Reinforce the places where they've had a win, and maybe they'll stay in it. So again, here are all the different things that could possibly go wrong in a transaction and more. And we have to focus on compromise to get to an agreement. Now, when we get to agreement, this is when it's super sad when a transaction falls apart after there's been an agreement. And it does. And one of the reasons is in red at the bottom. Always work with your lender or the team leader if you're on a team, or with your state broker. Work with them in order to know that when you're submitting an addendum to the bank, it's not going to be rejected. So, sometimes it's just better to say that the seller will contribute $5,000 toward closing costs and prepaid items than giving a laundry list of things that they found in the home inspection. And they're all minor things, but one of them could be something that precludes an FHA or VA loan. So be really careful about how you craft an addendum when you've come to an agreement. So sometimes an in-person meeting, like I said, can diffuse some of the emotion. You want to get people back on track so they're working together to get to the closing table. Sometimes you don't want to set up adversarial relationships with buyers or sellers, or they'll find ways to stick it to people at the end. So let's keep them happy and joyful with each other. Keep your commission out of it. Don't start throwing money at problems, because once you start, you have opened your wallet and they will keep coming back for more. So remember, you're likely going to work with this agent again. So next time, right now, you might be the listing agent and have the control, but next time they might have the listing and you have the anxious, nervous buyer, and the way you treated them is how they're going to treat you. So always remember, real estate is a small world and we like to treat each other with respect.